this is often a difficult seminar because our bellies are full, right? All of our blood is going from our brains to our stomachs. So I know that it might be a little challenging, but hopefully engaging enough that we will be able to learn about our emotions. Is this on? Well, you can hear it well enough, I'm sure. So it's entitled The Motion in Emotion. I think a lot of times we don't even notice, right, the word in the word itself, emotion, there is motion, how we can turn our feelings into focused action. Many times we just have feelings, and the feelings are there. We might ignore the feelings. We might ignore them by addictions, by busyness, as we talked about earlier. But can we be intentional about not just feeling our feelings, but recognizing them and using them as a good resource? So the motion in emotion. Just as a recap, most of you, I'm assuming, have been here either last night or this morning or both. We are talking about emotional intelligence, the importance of emotional intelligence, not just, yes, for success, but also in general for our good and just having a good mental health. Okay, is that on now? All right, there we go. And always keep in mind these four main components of emotional intelligence. And so obviously, this presentation right now on emotions are going to be the most important. If we don't even identify or manage our emotions, we are not going to have a good emotional intelligence. So how do we enhance our EQ? Well, we have been using CBT, and this morning we talked about behaviors. But remember, there's these three components, and you can't have good mental health or good emotional EQs without all three. And so this morning we talked about behaviors. Right now we'll talk about emotions, and then after this we'll talk about thoughts. But let's recap on the behaviors for a moment. The importance of behaviors for our mental well-being. We talked about how we live in a world of addiction and in general just engaging in a lot of unhealthy behaviors. And this again is not a comprehensive list, but you can take a look and do a self-assessment on which of these do I struggle with. And remember that sometimes we just engage in behaviors, and many times we might think about the impact that it has on our physical health, but how does this impact the brain and our emotional intelligence? We looked at how it impacts us on a brain chemical level. And if you missed the seminar, I was told that it was live streamed, so you can watch it later. But basically the idea is if you enhance your behavior, you can enhance your EQ. So we can change our chemicals. We want to make them balance in order for us to have a good mental health and emotional intelligence. But we also looked at the frontal lobe, because it's not coincidental that Satan is attacking the frontal lobe, where we make good decisions, where it's part of our inhibition, our ability to pump the brakes on our emotions and know when to be emotional and less emotional. And so we need to really take care of our frontal lobe. So we talked about replacing these behaviors, right? Taking the unhealthy, but a lot of times we just remove the unhealthy and we don't replace it. And that reminds me of the parable that talks about the man where the demon left him, but because he didn't fill himself with good things, especially Christ, 7 more came back. It's a principle that we can't just get rid of the bad in our lives. We have to also include the good. So we want to replace our unhealthy behaviors with healthy behaviors. So that was just a recap on behaviors. And I'll kind of allude back to it in some context here. But we want to then focus right now on emotion. How do I identify and manage my emotions? Now let's start with a question. I'm going to give you some different things, and just raise your hand if you were taught as a child to, number 1, were you taught to brush your teeth? Right? My guess is you were taught how to, and maybe spent some time of how to brush your teeth. What about to say please and thank you? Manners. Were you taught manners? Okay? What about your ABCs? Chewing your food, right, with your mouth closed. Some more than others. What about bathing yourself? Sometimes even whether bathing or other hygiene matters, were you taught to wipe your bottom? Yes, I hope so. What about to spell? Yes. Count? Tie your shoes. I still have a vivid memory of the first time I learned to tie my shoes. What about stop, drop, and roll, right? Maybe that's more of a California thing. We have a lot of fires. Someone was talking earlier to me about fires. But we learn in school, we have actual times and drills to stop, drop, and roll in the case of a fire. So these are things that we were taught as children, right? They're really important. But let me ask you this. Were you taught to identify and manage your emotions? Show of hands. I think I see one or two. We're not taught how to identify and manage our emotions. And it's kind of interesting, right? Because if you think about these other things, they're important. But obviously I'm biased in my field. But even think about for yourself. Would you have rather, if you could choose, to know how to tie your shoes or manage your emotions? But we spend so much time in these other areas of life, but we miss the importance of knowing what to do with our emotions. And the question is, how can we be expected to, or either for ourselves or others, to regulate our emotions if we were never taught? And I love this picture because what it's demonstrating is the mother in this case is the one, right, and mothers and fathers, but to come alongside us as children and learn, right, teach us, and we're to learn how to regulate our emotions. So if we're never taught, how could we be expected to know? And I have a passion of this topic because a lot of times I get clients who are like, oh, what's wrong with me? Right? I'm so emotional and I have all these problems. And what's really sad is the mental health field, what it's done is it's just put labels called disorders in ways that make people feel like it's them. But again, if you've never learned, then it's going to manifest itself in the disorder of depression, anxiety, and so forth. And so we blame a lot of people, and maybe you've been on the receiving end of this, but we can't be expected to know something that we were never taught. Now, what were you taught about emotions? Generally, we are taught that emotions are bad. Now, I want to hear from all of you. What were some, maybe not explicitly in these words, but what were some things that were told you or taught to you or modeled to you that demonstrated emotions are bad? I heard suppress them. What else? You weren't allowed to get angry, which is telling you anger is bad. Okay, what else? Yes, it's a sign of weakness. I actually put this up on the screen. It's an example of this where it might be even as innocent as don't cry, right? Be a big boy. What are you saying? That you are weak or you're not strong if you have certain emotions, including sadness. And what just blows my mind is maybe this kid just scraped their knees crying. Of course you're going to cry. Why would you try to shoo away the sadness? Okay, what else? Facts over feelings, right? And sometimes that is true, but it can be pushed in a way that makes you feel like feelings are completely wrong and erroneous. Think about different cultures for a moment. It's interesting because all cultures have different versions of the same emotions are bad. So I come from a Latina culture, and so oftentimes, right, very expressive and some allowance of emotions, but then you're dramatic, you're hysterical. There's that stereotype with that, not too many emotions, okay? Well, we might even not just cultural differences, but also gender differences. Veterans have high rates of mental illness, primarily because of this idea that emotions are bad. Men are not supposed to feel emotions, sometimes maybe emotions in general, or maybe just anger. You can express anger as a man, but not sadness. I was walking down with some friends, just in a different part, and there was this man with his son, and the son was crying, tiny little kid, crying, crying, crying. And the father looks at the kid and says, "You don't want to cry in front of these beautiful women, do you?" And I understood what he was trying to do and trying to cheer up the boy. But those are the subtle things, sometimes not so subtle, but subtle ways in which we communicate emotions are bad. Now, we may be graduating from that to maybe, let me mention this. Sometimes within the Christian culture, it's also promoted that emotions are bad, and people misquote or misuse Jeremiah 17. The heart is deceitful above all things, desperately wicked, who can know it? We use this incorrectly. I'll come back to this verse, but people say, oh, look, see, right, your emotions are so deceitful. But now sometimes we graduate to, well, some are bad, right? And probably I would guess that most of you probably have this version. You've known maybe that not all emotions are bad, but we tend to categorize them in this way. We have our good ones, the happiness, the joy, the excitement, the peace, love, hope, and then we have the bad: anger, anxiety, sadness, grief, guilt, and shame. And so we say some are good, some are bad. And whenever, and I see someone taking a picture, this is not the conclusion. So don't think this is the answer. Not yet. Is we think if it's bad, then I don't have permission to express those, and we suppress them. But we're going to look at something different, hopefully to change your view of emotions, which will directly impact how you then manage them. The Bible says in Ecclesiastes 3 that there's a time for everything, including different emotions. Notice, a time to weep, a time to laugh, a time to mourn, and a time to dance, and it goes on. This is describing, hey, there are emotions that we experience, and there are different times for different emotions, and that's okay. The Bible is okay with emotions. So emotions, I want to argue today, and I'll try to add some evidence to this, that all emotions are good. Now, there will be a caveat to that, so don't, jump your seats quite yet. Emotions are good. And let me explain why. Emotions are good because they are signals. I want you to treat your emotions as signals, okay? Emotions are also, in a basic, overly simplified way, I want you to think of them as, and they are partially so, chemical reactions. Have you ever thought about what exactly is an emotion? What is sadness? What is anger? What is anxiety? There's no button in our brains that is the sadness button or anxiety and so forth. They're chemicals. So what happens is something happens in our world, or it can be internal as well, a trigger, that triggers our body's release of chemicals. And that chemical, the purpose of it, well, there's two main purposes. They have two functions, is to communicate and motivate. The chemical in our bodies to communicate something in our world is happening, and then it's motivating us to take some sort of action. Emotions are signals, but we don't listen to these signals. That's why motivate, right, is the emotion. There's the emotion part. Too often, because we ignore our feelings and our emotions, we never take an action. We never get anything resolved or done. So let's go through some of these examples. I think we can think first, before we get to emotions, we better understand this idea with the idea of pain, right? So pain, when we feel it, we're like, oh, bad, right? I don't want to feel pain. But pain is a signal. What does pain communicate? What was that? Danger, right? Something's wrong. Let's say if I broke my wrist when I was in junior high playing football, and there was a lot of pain, right? It's communicating something is terribly wrong. Imagine if I didn't have pain. I would have kept on playing. I wouldn't have done anything different. Communicate something's wrong. What does it motivate me to do? Yeah, go fix it. Think about any pain you've experienced. when I first started my job as a therapist, you have session after session, and I hadn't experienced that before. I was dehydrated because I wasn't drinking enough water in between sessions and filling up my water bottle. And I had this excruciating headache pain that I never experienced before. That headache pain was communicating, you are dehydrated. What is it motivating me to do? Drink water. Imagine if I didn't have that pain signal. Okay, what about hunger? Hunger is also a signal. What does it communicate? You need food, right? Hopefully none of you are right now currently hungry. It's saying you need food. You need fuel for your body. And what does it motivate you to do? Eat. Now, what's sad today is many people are overly busy or using other drugs in ways that it suppresses the appetite, or even medications can. And so we're even not being intimate with our bodies to understand our hunger signals. And then we also could apply that to thirst. Now, often they say actually when you're thirsty, it's a signal that you're dehydrated, like it's too far. Like, thankfully, we want to be hydrated enough that we don't have the signal for thirst. But we paid attention to those signals, to pain, to hunger, to thirst. But with emotions, we don't. So let's go through the first one, anxiety. What do you think? Let me give you a clean example. You see a lion, okay? And you feel anxious. What is it communicating? So someone said run. That's the motivation. What is it communicating first before you need to run? Danger. Exactly. And then it would motivate you. This is why we call the system fight or flight. Now, we obviously would not fight a lion unless you're David, but we would be motivated to take an action to escape the danger. Now, let's think about an anxiety a trigger of anxiety that might not be a lion. Let's say you're at work and you have to go talk to your boss. You're going to ask them for a promotion that you've long overdue. You might start feeling some anxiety. What is it communicating? So stress would be another kind of signal. So go back to anxiety communicates danger. What's the danger that you perceive here potentially with your boss? He could say no. He might fire you. There's danger that we are thinking of. So whether it's a lion or our boss, we are perceiving potential danger. Now, what is that going to motivate you to do? It might motivate you to escape in the sense of, it's not even worth asking. If there's a high probability that he would fire you, you're like, promotion, not that important. Or remember, flight or fight. You might say, I've been here 10 years. I deserve this promotion. So I'm going to fight it. So in summary, anxiety always communicates some sort of danger. Think about other times you've experienced anxiety before. It's some perception of danger. And our body is beautifully designed to communicate that to us and then motivate us to an appropriate action. And we could go for, several minutes talking about different examples of when you feel anxious. First day of school, right? On a first date, there's potential danger, and especially in relationships, because relationships are so important to us that the danger might be a rupture of a relationship. So we have to realize anxiety is a good signal, wanting us to be prepared in a way that can help us. What's interesting is if you study, the Pastor Aaron talked a lot about, Genesis 3, and in the garden, there's a commentary on the garden in Patriarchs and Prophets that talks about Eve. She was with her husband, and then she started to wander away. And what's interesting, as she wandered away from her husband's side, it says, on perceiving that she was alone, she felt an apprehension of danger. Interesting. Even before the fall, she experienced some fear. Now, remember, a signal. She felt an apprehension of danger, but what did she do? Dismissed her fear. She didn't pay attention to the signal. The signal was trying to protect her, say, hey, it's not good for you to be alone. Go back with your husband. You're going to be exposed to temptation. But she dismissed her fears, deciding that she had sufficient wisdom and strength to discern evil and to withstand it. This is kind of the self-reliant spirit that we have sometimes of, I'm strong enough, I can do it. Unmindful of the angel's caution, she soon found herself gazing with mingled curiosity and admiration upon the forbidden tree. Interesting, right? That before even the fall, because sometimes people tell me, oh, anxiety came because of sin and anxiety is bad and look how you feel it. And it's like, no, God designed, we have half of our nervous system is fight or flight. The sympathetic nervous system was designed to help us navigate through life. Imagine if we didn't have fight or flight. We would be exposed to the evils in this world without any sort of alarm system. Imagine your house, which we'll come back to this example, imagine your house without a fire alarm. We would want an alarm system. So fear and anxiety can protect us. What about guilt? What do you think guilt communicates? Why do we feel guilty? What's the signal? Not close to God. Okay, well, just in general, not even a spiritual application, just you're feeling guilty about something. I have done something wrong. That's what it's communicating. If I feel guilty that I stole something, if I feel guilty that I hurt a friend, I have done something wrong. Now, what is it motivating you to do? To make it right. Guilt is a wonderful feeling. Now, later we'll talk about there's illegitimate guilt where we feel guilty for something we haven't done wrong. But in general, guilt is a good feeling that signals I've done something wrong and motivates us. Hopefully that signal continues until we've made it right. Now, it can apply to, in a spiritual sense, if I feel guilty that I've done something that hurts my relationship with God or with others, then yes, we want to then restore that. Let's use one of the pleasant emotions. What about happiness? What do you think that communicates? Something's good? Is that what I heard? Something's going well, something's good. If you're with a person, you feel happy, right? I like this. And it's motivating us to do it more. It's a signal. Have you ever thought about that? Happiness, if I feel happiness with a person, hang out with them more. If you feel happy when you're doing a hobby, do it more. It's a signal that helps us also increase good things. But what about, people often at this point are like, oh, but what about, there's some other ones that I think are still bad. What about anger, right? Can anger really be a good signal? Now, it's so interesting that we kind of demonize anger when the Bible's very clear. Be angry and what? So is anger sin? No, it separates them. Be angry, you can be angry, but it's also telling you, well, it's how you're angry, right? You could sin with anger. Do not let the sun go down on your anger, which is an example of resentment, where resentment means to the root resentir, right? To refeel. It's to refeel anger over and over and over again. You're holding on to that anger and give no opportunity to the devil. So it's what we do with anger. So what do you think anger communicates? Think about the times maybe that you have felt angry. What does it communicate? I heard disappointed. Is that what I heard? So that's a different emotion. What does it communicate? Something's not right. Something beyond just not right. Unjust. Some sort of injustice has happened. If you see a child being beaten or mistreated, I hope that gets your blood boiling, that there's injustice happening. Sometimes you watch the news, right? That riles us up because we might see something unjust. What does it motivate us to do? Fix it, to address it. And if you think about it, this is when we read in God's word about God's wrath, right? God is angry about the injustice in this world. He wants to correct it as well. And so anger can communicate that something unjust is happening, and it can motivate us to then correct it. What about sadness? What do you think sadness communicates? Now, notice in Ecclesiastes chapter 7, it has this interesting verse. The sorrow is better than laughter. Wait, what? I don't know about you, but I like to laugh more than I like to cry. Sorrow is better than laughter? For by a sad countenance the heart is made better. What does sadness communicate? Any ideas? A loss. I heard it. Now, a loss of anything? Are you sad when you lose, a piece of a receipt that you bought that you don't care about? A great loss, a loss of something of value to you. So, for example, one of the most terrible experiences of sadness is grief, where you lose someone that you love. There might be other experiences of sadness after a breakup. Right? Maybe you're not sad about the person, but maybe you're sad that you don't have a person anymore. Or it could be sadness of, graduating. You're happy that you're graduating, but maybe you're also sad that you're losing some friendships that you had. Right? Sadness communicates the loss of something of value. What do you think it motivates us to do? To regain what was lost. Now, this one's a little tricky because sometimes you can't regain, but it's a signal that hopefully, like if let's say you are sad that you haven't talked to a friend in years, well, some people are just like, oh, I haven't talked to them. It's motivating you to pick up the phone and call them. I have some clients who are like, I haven't talked to my sister in 5 years. I'm like, and they're really sad. I'm like, okay. And what can you do about it, right? You can call. We have these signals to motivate us. Sometimes, like grief, we may not be able to regain what was lost. And that's where we have to, the motivation then is to accept the loss and to move forward. The signals of emotion, though, can be distorted by our behaviors. That's what we talked about earlier. For example, if I'm sleepy and I'm hungry and these other behaviors, not taking care of my physical body, my hormones and my chemicals may be off. This is where, someone that brought up yesterday, they're like, oh, menopause, sometimes your emotions are very off. Yeah, there might be some other experiences that might be throwing off the signals. I'm crying as if I'm sad, but I'm not actually sad. Women experience this in many different phases of their lives, and so it's important to know, is this a pure signal of something that is happening in my world, or is this a signal that might be a little distorted by some other factor? And this is why it's important. If you take care of your body, those signals become clearer. But if you don't take care of your body, you're not sure, am I really angry at my partner? Or is it because I am tired? Am I really angry at my child? Are they really doing something that warrants my anger? Or is it because I'm just frustrated and irritable because I haven't taken care of myself? Or maybe I'm angry because of something happened at work that I'm not addressing and I'm taking it out on my kids. And then, of course, and this is one thing we're going to emphasize in our next presentation, is many times, our emotions are distorted by our thoughts. So, using this example of a fire alarm, I don't know if any of you, most likely someone at least, has experienced where their fire alarm starts to beep when there's no fire. Yes, anyone? All the time. And whether it's firing just for the fun of it, or sometimes it fires when it's just a little bit of smoke. Maybe your toaster is toasting bread and there's barely any smoke and it's like, right? It's super annoying. Well, what do? Do we get rid of the fire alarm? I heard yes. Why don't we get rid of the fire alarm, or shouldn't? We need it. So what should we do instead? The two extremes are leave it and let it beep all the time and it's super annoying, or we take it out and we don't, we just get rid of it. Well, silence it. Wrong. You don't want to silence it. Why? Because if there is a fire, you're in danger. That's what we do with addictions. We silence our emotions when we don't like them, and then when there's actually a time of danger, we don't know how to listen to our emotions. What's sad, let me just insert this here and we'll come back to this. Panic attacks, for example, are often a growing pressure of anxiety that when we don't listen to it in its small, original stages, it builds, and it starts screaming at us. Also, what happens when we often suppress our emotions, they come out physically. So I used to work in a primary care setting where they were integrating psychologists because a lot of people don't go see psychologists on their own. And so they come to see the doctor and they say, I have this terrible, constant GI issue, a stomach pain. And the doctor does all these evaluations, nothing. And what do they find? Anxiety. Or they might be, there's a popular book called The Body Keeps a Score, where a lot of physical ailments are really the effects of trauma. And because we are not willing to acknowledge our feelings and our emotions, our body's like, hey, well, maybe if I show you other signals in physical symptoms. This also happens, for example, with body tension. I tend to carry some of my stress in my shoulders. It's my body's way of communicating to me, Katie, you're tensing and you're feeling too stressed. So we don't want to get rid of the fire alarm. We need to recalibrate the fire alarm to make sure it only fires when there's fire. It only sounds when there's significant amounts of smoke that would warrant concern. So we need to recalibrate our emotion. Make sure that we're then being able to know what is it communicating and what I can do about it. And I think this is something that most people struggle with. This is a sign of low emotional intelligence. Yes, go ahead. That's true. Yes, great example. So I don't know if all of you heard that, but just in case you didn't, or for the people online, is he's mentioning to kind of readjust things to make sure that your emotions are not, firing as much. So you can move the toaster, right? So it's not right underneath the fire alarm, or you can change the times where you have, certain conversations, especially with couples. That's a great strategy. Don't have it when you're super stressed, whether late at night or right when you come back home from your work. We can change things to make sure that we are in a better position to respond. Definitely. Well, that would be kind of a first way to start dealing with that. But many times, let's say if your toaster is not underneath the fire alarm and it's still firing, this is where sometimes there might be prior experiences, including trauma, that makes our systems hypersensitive to reacting, and we have to learn that as well. So it's important to think about emotions as indicators, not dictators. So we want to listen and be like, hey, what is this communicating? What is this motivating? But kind of referencing back to the facts over feelings, it doesn't mean that my feelings have to dictate everything that I do either. So we want to listen as they indicate things, but it doesn't mean that we have to make them our dictators in our lives. So emotions are good. The main culprits are our thoughts. And this is really important to realize, because if we have the wrong culprits, we are applying the wrong solutions. And this is what's happening with addictions. We think it's the emotions, so we push them away. And what's actually crazy is the more you push them away, the more they grow, and the bigger they become. And then they're problematic. This happens with kids in tantrums. Parents tell them to just stop, or they try to suppress the tantrum for the child, and the child and then explodes even more. And then that reaffirms this idea that something's wrong with the child. But it's not the child, it's how we're responding and not teaching the child to manage their emotion. So going back to this, when it says the heart is deceitful, what it's really saying is the mind, the thoughts behind it. It's not random feelings, chemicals in our bodies that's the problem. It's our thoughts. Our thoughts are very deceptive, and we have to learn, and that's why there's a whole, separate presentation on this. But think about it in this way. You'll notice I like analogies. I think it helps us to understand these concepts better. Is a fire good or bad? It depends. Yes, that's true. We sometimes can think about, oh, fire is bad, it destroys. But fire can be good. It can warm us up, right? When we think about a fire in relation to our emotions and our thoughts, emotions are the flame. And what happens to a fire if you don't fuel it? What eventually happens? It dies out. If you feel a feeling and, you do something about it, you're stressed about paying a bill, you pay the bill, fire goes out, stress is gone. But what happens if you fuel the fire? You add some logs into the fire, you either maintain it or it grows. This is the function of our thoughts. If you think, oh, there's a lion outside, anxiety, right? Now, if someone says, oh, no, that's not a lion, that was just a cute little kitty, right? If you think, no, it's definitely a lion. I know there's a lion. I'm not going outside. There's definitely a lion out there. Your thoughts are what's maintaining the anxiety. Anxiety is not the problem. It's your thoughts. This is why so many of us have constant emotions, not because the emotions are the problem, because our thoughts, either they're distorted and they're creating emotions that don't need to be there, or they are thoughts that are not helpful. They may be true, but not helpful. And especially, this is when we sometimes ruminate on thoughts. And rumination is, the example of rumination is adding the logs constantly to the fire, over and over and over again, maintaining a big, huge fire. But emotions, as chemicals, our body releases it, the chemicals into our body. So let's say anxiety, we get a rush of cortisol, we get adrenaline, norepinephrine, all these chemicals. Then we go and we do something about it. We use up the hormones and the chemicals, and then it's done. It's like a wave. It goes up, the emotion comes down. But our thoughts often keep our emotions going. So in conclusion, emotions are good. They're natural. They're God-given. God designed our bodies in ways to help us navigate through life. We wouldn't be able to navigate through life without emotions. They help us communicate, right, both to ourselves and to others, and it motivates us to action. So either sometimes we don't listen at all, or we listen, but we take no action. Some of my clients, I tell them, you just like to marinate in your emotions. You're just like sitting in them. Like, no, you got to take action, resolve them. Emotions can seem bad, dependent on how we manage them, and the main culprit are our thoughts. And just, I'll add the component too, be mindful of your behaviors, that they may not be magnifying those emotions. So how do I manage my emotions, right? Partially, it's learning how to listen to them, right? Knowing that they're signals. But what are some more specific things that we can cover? I'm not going to go through all of these in the sense of break them all down, but just some tips. There's a lot of different strategies out there. But if I were to boil these down, think about it this way. You want to be more grateful and intimate with the body God gave you. Get to know your body. What does it need? So, for example, with behaviors, how does diet, sleep, and so forth impact my emotions? If you want to be less emotionally labile, well, take care of your body. For example, with bipolar disorder, which most people only take the medication route, sleep is a major contributing factor to manic episodes. It's one of the primary things that trigger manic episodes. Not only that, but if you are taking medication, sugar and having high processed sugar actually makes your medication less effective. So get to know your body. How did God design you? And it's like if you think about a car, right? If you want to make sure the car runs well, who designed the car and what's the manual to make sure the car runs well? Are you going to put diesel in a gasoline car? It's like, no, you're going to want to get to know your body, understand how God designed it to run. Now, stop it stands for stop, take a step back, observe, and then proceed mindfully. It's this idea that when we're really emotional, sometimes we just need to step back. This happens a lot with couples. They're going back and forth. And let me ask you this. What's the quickest way, or one of the quickest ways, to get a boiling pot of water to stop boiling? Yes, some people will say, oh, turn off the burner. Why does that not work? Because the burner is still hot. So what you need to do is you need to remove it from the burner. Sometimes we're in a situation that's causing a lot of emotions, especially, let's say, frustration or anger, and we just stay there on the burner. And we're like, I'm going to get through this, and my spouse is going to understand me, and then they start saying things, and it just keeps on escalating. Take a break. Remove yourself. Allow your emotions to calm down. Allow your brain to calm down, and then come back. And I say that because some people, they've learned, okay, I need to remove myself, but they never come back to address the situation, to resolve it. Take a step back. If something's causing you high amounts of anxiety, take a moment, step away, then come back later. Going back to this idea of how did God design us, deep breathing is one of the most probably popular just skills that people are learning these days for anxiety. And what's really fascinating is, if you look at a baby breathe, they naturally do deep breaths. They breathe with their belly. Have you seen that? The baby's belly is like, and it goes down. Even animals. We were designed to do deep breathing. But by poor posture, by a lack of exercise, by a lack of movement, we've become individuals that are engaging in more shallow breathing. And we are restricting air and blood flow to our brains in ways that are causing more mental health difficulties. So we need to engage intentionally in things that allow for us to deep breathe. Singing, for example, is an example of that. We naturally, if we sing a lot, if you struggle with singing or you don't sing that much, it might take some time to add up to this. You see this with singers. How are they able to hold a really long note? They have built their ability to have a strong diaphragm that is related to deep breathing. So deep breathing is very, very effective in helping us manage our emotions, soothing the body. Journaling is really helpful in processing our thoughts and our feelings. You see this a lot in the Psalms. Have you noticed that David, it's just like one big journal. It's not only David who wrote the Psalms, but he is processing his emotions. He's like whining, like, God, why are all my enemies against me? Why have you, left me? Blah, blah, blah. He's pouring out his heart. He's like journaling. He's expressing his emotions. Now, what's really great is the Psalms show a model of how to do it, because he expresses and kind of sounds a bit whiny, but then he has a but, and he ends it, and he says, but the Lord is my strength. The Lord is my rock. And so he changes his narrative. He changes his thoughts in his own journaling experience. We can also self-soothe through the senses. What I mean by that is, again, getting to know your body, getting to know how God designed you. God designed us to be soothed through our senses. When a child, let's say, is hurting, a young child, they run to their mother. And how does the mother soothe the child? Touch, right? Either through the pressure of touch, hugging them, caressing them. How else? So that's one sense. Touch. Sound. How? the voice of the mother, and she'll even start talking in a different way that's soothing to the ears. So we have touch, we have sound. What about smell? My mom, growing up, wore Chanel No. 5. That was a scent to me that was soothing because it was a symbol of my mother through the scent. What about through the sight of just seeing mom? There have been times in my life I just look at my mom and she knows something's happening and I just start crying, right? I'm soothed by the sight of my mother. And sometimes taste, right, through the bottle. We are soothed through the senses. This is why nature is extremely soothing for us. Nature is one of the all-encompassing soothing experiences that we have for our senses. The sight of beautiful colors. You guys have a lot more green here than we have in California. It's so soothing. What about the scent? What's so interesting is what we're doing now with mental health is we're packaging nature in little bits. You get the sounds of the waves on YouTube for meditation. And you get the scent in essential oil bottles. We're packaging it separately. What we're doing is we're trying to disconnect nature from God. But we are designed to be in nature, and so we are soothed through our senses. Connection with others. How does it feel when you're very emotional and you share it with a close friend, right? Don't you just sometimes, well, it depends on the friend, but most times we feel automatically better. How do you also develop that connection with God? God being your best friend, that you can bring your things to Him through prayer as well as with nature. And then obviously changing our thoughts will be a huge component in managing our emotions, which we'll talk about next. And then mindfulness and action. So being mindful of our emotions, which I'm going to elaborate on this right now. So we talked about with mindfulness slowing down, right? We talked about overwork and how that's a barrier to emotional intelligence. So slow down, listen to your body signals. We're going to talk about in a moment building our emotion vocabulary. That's important to identifying our emotion. And then what I label as ICE versus ACE, which will make sense in a moment. So there's a study that was done that looked at, these are body heat maps. And this key here, you can see 0 is black, meaning you feel no emotions, there's no heat in your body. And then we have red and yellow being intense heat, right? Yellow being the most intense. And then blue and light blue is the absence of heat. So what they did in this research study is they tried to summarize what are people's experiences of different emotions and understand what do we feel in our bodies. So let me draw your attention to anxiety. So bottom left, what do you notice about anxiety? Heartburn, right? The most intense heat is often described in the chest area. This is where people say their heart rate is increasing, sometimes feeling like it's jumping out of their chest. Sometimes they have chest pain. My sister, when she gets anxious, her whole chest here gets red, kind of different blotches of red. But anxiety often is concentrated in that region. So let's say if you're trying to become more familiar with your own signals, what does anxiety feel like to me? When does my body communicate that to me? What do you notice about anger? Where do we see the most intense heat? So we do see it in the heart region, similar to anxiety. We see it in the hands. Many times when we're angry, we actually tense. Not that we're actually going to hit someone, but we tense our body, especially our hands, ready for fight. We also see much more in the head region. This is why I didn't mention this, but one of the ways to soothe our emotions through the senses is also through cold water. So one of the quickest ways to bring down your anxiety or anger is through dunking your head in an ice-cold bowl of water. There are blood vessels in our face that help to quickly calm us, and this is why with anger we see a lot in the head, but also with anxiety, some people will also do their hands or their wrists. Some people will hold ice, as a way of calming down their nervous system. You just want to be careful with ice because you don't want to do any self-harm and ice burn. But anger, we see it a lot in the chest, the head, and the hands. What about depression? What do we see in depression? Whispers, whispers. We see an absence of heat. This is where a lot of people describe feeling cold, feeling empty. How can you get to know the signs and the signals of depression in your body? And we're not going to go through each one of these. I think pride is kind of funny, right? When you say it's all in your head, like they're full of themselves, right? Shame, we see a lot in the cheeks, right? This is when we blush, because blushing means more blood flow to our cheeks when we might feel shame or embarrassment. And notice happiness. We're warm all over, which is wonderful. But we also see a concentration in the chest and in the face. I have some clients that as they're overcoming anxiety, they start feeling more happiness and they actually get scared. They think it's anxiety. Their heart rate is increasing because of happiness. They're like, oh no, what am I feeling? It's like, no, happiness can sometimes also feel like anxiety, but this is why you have to get to know your body. Here is a chart. There are many different feelings charts out there. I just chose this one because I like how it's organized, but it's important for you to develop, not just for yourselves, but those who are parents, help your children develop your emotion vocabulary. There's actually research that shows people who have more extensive emotional vocabulary, also it translates to higher emotional intelligence. So oftentimes if I ask someone, how do you feel? They lack the ability to communicate with words what's happening internally for them. And if you were never taught, you also don't know. So what I like is there's these 5 main categories. Not all emotions fit under these, but you can think about it in ways of describing the intensity of your emotions as well. So sometimes what's really sad these days is there's more mental health awareness, but we're now limiting ourselves to just depressed or anxiety. I'm depressed, I'm anxious. But notice the category of afraid. Yes, you could be anxious, but you could also be feeling uneasy. You could be feeling nervous. You could be feeling frantic, right? Petrified. You want to develop your emotion vocabulary. Or instead of using depressed for everything, am I disappointed? Am I dissatisfied? Am I upset? Am I feeling distressed? Try to expand your emotion vocabulary. I saw a hand in the back. Yes. Yeah, so I mentioned earlier at some point, this weekend's blurring, whether yesterday or today, that my slides will be available to everyone. So you can have it through there, yes. And you could Google feelings list and you'll see a lot of different versions of this. So find the one that you like the most. It doesn't have to be this one. And some of these I think are a little off, but whatever works for you, expanding your emotion vocabulary is really important. I hope that I have one day when we start having kids, you could ask my kids how they feel and they'll be like, I'm feeling quite dishonored right now, right? Like, hopefully one day. My kid might need some therapy of being a therapist kid, yeah. Yes. Yes. Great question. And I love that question because I'm sure other people are having that as well. So there's 2 parts to that. There's what it communicates to me and what it communicates to others. So really what's happening in our body, there's not going to be an anger versus irritable feeling. They're just different cocktails of different chemicals, right? You might feel more of one or the other. Let's start with communicating to others. Would it be important, I don't know if are you married or I don't want to assume, right? Okay, if your spouse tells you, I'm angry versus I'm irritable, does it make a difference? Yes. So communication to others is really important. If you said, instead of angry, this happens actually a lot with couples and actually with people. Most of us are actually not even angry. Most of us are hurt. I don't know if you've seen this. It's a really good image of an iceberg where anger's on the top, where that's what you see. And on the bottom, underneath the surface, is sadness, disappointment, hurt. And so we say, I'm angry. I only need 5 words for my vocabulary, right? And a lot of us are like that. I'm angry, that's it. But we're not accurately communicating what we actually feel. And so let's say if you weren't angry, you were hurt, and you said, I'm angry. What does the anger do? I'm like giving you a hand signal. It pushes someone away. I'm angry at you versus I'm hurt. That pulls someone towards. So Satan a lot of times will do this in marriages and in relationships. We're trying to protect ourselves. I'm angry at you because you did this, the blame, 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 versus I felt really hurt when you said that. Because Satan knows that that can push away versus reunite and restore. So one, it's very important to more accurately describe what you're experiencing to someone else to help them meet your needs. Now, what about for yourself? Does it really matter whether I'm angry or irritable? Well, going back to the signals, if you don't have an accurate communication, you don't have an accurate motivation. If I'm angry versus irritable, you won't know exactly what might be the best solution. And you might know exactly what to do. So if I'm angry and sometimes I go a step further. I tell clients not only what word, but 0 to 100. How intense is it? You're like, I'm angry at a 99. I'm going to tell, what's your name, sir? Jose. I'd be like, Jose, whatever you're going to do next is going to be very different than if you're irritable at a 20. So you would then know that more intimately for yourself, and that's going to help you monitor your emotions better and know what to do better. Does that answer your question? Yeah. There's not going to be huge differences for some circumstances, so I'm not saying that this is going to apply for everything. But get to know yourself more intimately in a way that you can know better what to do, how to respond, and helping others also respond better to you in your relationships. Great question. So the typical kind of progression that we have with our emotions is ICE. We typically ignore, conceal, and then explode in our emotions, whether that's anger, anxiety, sadness. Some people have told me, like, I just found myself for no reason bursting out into tears. Your body does not randomly burst out into something, or I had a random panic attack. It does not happen randomly. Maybe it seems random because you ignored it, you concealed it, and it's like a, Jack in the Box, where it's like, bloop! Seems random, but that pressure was building over time. So instead of the ice, you don't want to ice your emotions, you want to ace them. Accept, clarify, and express. In this picture, the dotted or dashed line is the ice in which we deny our emotions. It goes up, and when we explode, it does come down. This is why we feel better after we explode. But what's the downside of exploding? Collateral damage to ourselves or others. And sometimes it also puts here in the chart, maybe we don't explode, but we dump. Now, I won't ask you if you've dumped on people before, but for sure you can answer me this question. Have you ever been on the receiving end of someone coming and dumping all their emotions on you? How does it feel? Most times, not so good. Overwhelming, for sure. That's another form of explosion where we're dumping versus trying to accept, clarify, and express. So here's some questions you can ask yourself. Acceptance would be, okay, emotions are good, they're signals. I am feeling, and then your emotion vocabulary. And emotions are one word. So I am feeling sad. I'm feeling, disappointed. I'm feeling hurt. Then clarify. Why am I feeling this? What's the cause or causes? If any of you struggle or have experienced trauma and PTSD, a good little add-on to this is What is the cause? Is this a current situation or is this from my trauma? Because sometimes we might react to like, oh, this person, I feel anxious, they're dangerous. And it's not really that person. It reminds you of someone else in your past that might be triggering a more PTSD response. What is it communicating? And then lastly, expressing. Emotions are energy that need to be released. What is it motivating me to do? Express and take action for resolution. It's so sad that many of us just have emotions that are stuck in our bodies and either manifest themselves in physical symptoms or end up exploding with collateral damage, hurting ourselves and hurting others. So, in conclusion, application, reflect on your past. What was the view of emotions? The culture, your family culture, your religion, so forth. What were you taught or not taught in identifying and managing your emotions? And then what is one step you can take to become more aware of and or better manage your emotions? Now, most likely, because people are so emotionally illiterate, that there's probably a lot of things you could do as a result in application after this, but start small, as I mentioned, with behaviors. And I always sometimes feel bad because in weekends like this, I'm like giving you tons of information of which would take sessions with some of my clients. So be patient with yourselves and pace yourselves. And we will probably, I'll say a prayer. We'll take a break so you can stretch a little bit, walk a little bit, because the next one is a kind of a longer and more in-depth presentation. So I want you guys to be having a fresh mind. So let's pray and then we leave for break. Father in heaven, thank you so much for the beautiful design of our bodies, the way that you created it in a way that we can learn and navigate in this life, especially, God, in a very simple world with actual dangers. And so, Father, I pray that everyone here can learn to love their bodies and pay closer attention in a way that you can give them through your Holy Spirit discernment of what they feel, why they feel it, what to do with it, and not just for themselves and improving their emotional intelligence, but also, God, for their relationships. And so, Lord, we pray and we thank you so much. In Jesus' name, amen. So it's 3:33. Let's maybe come back at 3:45.